Hey, what's up guys? This is Gary, and I'm here today to bring you Hot Boys Garage episode 16. And today's episode is going to be all about this 2007 Arctic Cat DVX 90 Sport Quad. We're going to make it a good bit faster by removing a little collar out of the clutch on the left side of the engine, and we're also going to do a little bit of maintenance on it. We're going to change the engine and transmission oil. Again, the stuff I show you guys in this video is going to be specific to the 2007 Arctic Cat DVX 90 Sport Quad, but this quad shares an engine with quite a few other different make and model ATVs, including Kawasaki, Kymco, even Can-Am, and what you see in this video can also be applied to several different 50cc and 70cc kids quads. So just keep that in mind when you're watching. Okay, here are the tools and materials you're going to need to get the job done. First off, a ratchet, a couple different size extensions, 8, 10, and 17 millimeter sockets, a 17 millimeter ratchet wrench, 10 millimeter box end wrench, Phillips head screwdriver, needle nose pliers, and door channel locks. You also need a decent work light. Small battery powered impact will make things go faster, and I'd recommend a nice battery impact or air impact, some good loosening torque, some brake clean and some shop towels, the engine and transmission oil of your choice, as well as a funnel and a drain pan. Okay, let's get started. First up, we're going to remove that little collar from the clutch system, which will give us an extra 15 mile an hour top speed. First thing we're going to need to do is remove this lower left black plastic cover here, and to do that we'll remove these 3 screws or bolts here, these 3 back here, as well as this one here and this one up here, and they're a Phillips button head on the front, and then on the back they are a 10 millimeter lock nut. So we'll remove all 8 of those. Then we'll remove these 4 10 millimeter bolts down here, and then we'll pull this out, set it aside. Next we'll take needle nose pliers, remove this clamp here, and pull the hose off the front of the case. Now with the vent hose removed, we can remove the 8 millimeter bolts holding this side cover on. With those 8 bolts loosened and removed, you now wiggle and remove the side cover. The side cover removed, you can take a large battery impact or an air impact with some good loosening torque, 17 millimeter socket. We're going to remove this bolt here. We'll zip it off. We'll remove the splined washer here. This is the engagement for the kicker. And then we'll remove this outer piece here. And that'll give us access to the collar we need to remove. And that collar we're going to remove is right here. This thin outer collar that goes over the shaft here. In order to remove it, we need to get some slack in the belt. So to do that, we'll kind of squeeze it together. We get some slack, and then we can pull that bushing right out of there. And that's it. Now all you've got to do is put everything back together. First thing is make sure the belt is fully seated up all the way here. And we'll put this guy back on. Make sure you've got this outer piece seated far enough back that you can see some of the splines back here. So when we put this splined washer back on, it engages the kicker. Need to make sure that it's got some spline engagement. Put it on, followed by the nut. Tighten it down. I usually just use the impact. I think this thing does have a torque spec. I think it might be 60 foot-pounds, but it needs to be pretty tight. After you've got the nut back on, slide the side cover back up on. Put the 8 bolts back in. All of the bolts for the primary cover are the same except for one. One's a little bit shorter, and it goes right up here at the top left. After we've got all the bolts in and tightened back down, we put the breather back on and secure it with the clamp. Now our plastic heel guard shroud thing can go back on. Just slip back in, secure it with the 4 bottom bolts and the 8 top bolts and nuts. And with all those bolts and nuts in and tightened back down, pretty much it. That little bushing in or out is a 15 mile an hour difference in top speed. With the collar installed, tops out at about 15 mile an hour. And with that collar removed, bike will top out at roughly 30 mile an hour. To change the engine and transmission oil, first thing we'll need to do is remove this plastic guard here by removing these 2 10 millimeter bolts. After that, we'll remove this large plastic guard here. That's done by removing the 4 10 millimeter bolts down here, as well as these 6 Phillips head bolts here, 3 here on the front, 3 here on the back, 1 up here and 1 down here. And each of these has a 10 millimeter nut on the back. We'll remove all those, pull the covers off. Next we'll come over to the left side and do the same thing. We'll remove this plastic heel guard shroud thing, removing the 4 10 millimeter bolts down here, and the 8 total Phillips head bolts, 3 here in the front, 2 up here, 3 in the back, and they've got 10 millimeter nuts on the back of them as well. So we'll remove all those, pull this guy out. Now with the cover removed, we'll slide our oil drain pan underneath. And right down here underneath the primary cover, hopefully you can see it, there is a oil drain bolt right there, 17 millimeters. We'll remove that to let the engine oil drain out. Back over here on the right side of the quad, once you've got your oil drain plug out and the oil draining, go ahead and loosen up your oil filler dipstick tube here, and then we can come down here below to remove the oil filter screen, and it is right in here. See right here from the underside, there is a 17 millimeter bolt right there, right above my finger, and that is the oil filter screen. And to get to that, the easiest thing I've found to use is a 17 millimeter ratcheting wrench. So there will be some oil in that whenever we loosen it up and pull it out. So make sure you've got your drain pan slid over so you don't make a mess. Here's the oil filter screen removed. It's 3 pieces. Got the cap, the spring, and the filter screen itself. Just got kind of a rubber gasket attached to it. This is how it comes out and goes in. And what I'll do to clean this, I'll hose it down with brake clean really well. Make sure we get it nice and clean. Take and put a light coat of new oil on this rubber surface here and our rubber gasket here. The oil filter screen, spring, and cap will go back up inside the same way it came out. Have to go in from the underside, kind of maneuver it up and in. And again, it is spring loaded, so you'll have to apply a little bit of pressure at first and tighten it down to get the thread started. And you'll tighten it down with the 17 millimeter wrench. You can get a torque wrench in there. I think the torque spec is 18 foot-pounds. I just tighten it up to where it is pretty snug because I can't get my torque wrench in there. If you got oil everywhere over here, good time to use some brake clean. Just spray the area down, hose it off pretty good with brake clean, and then we'll go back over on the left side of the quad. Over here on the left side, we'll take our oil drain bolt, clean it off, replace the drain bolt washer here if yours is messed up. And we'll come down here, clean off the drain bolt area, and reinstall the drain bolt. Okay, once you've got it back installed, you can torque it down to 18 foot-pounds as well. And then if you're like me, you've probably gotten oil all over the frame and the brake line here, so I usually just use a rag and or some brake clean here, hose the area down to get all the oil off. The last thing to do for our engine oil change would be to come back over here on the right hand side of the engine, pull the oil dipstick out, and refill the engine with engine oil. And I believe the service manual calls for 0W40 oil. I think that's probably going to depend on the weather in your region and your riding conditions. And the capacity should be roughly 0.84 quarts. What I usually do is I'll usually put right about 3/4 of a quart in, and I'll take and put my dipstick in here and just barely seat it. You don't thread it in. Pull it back out, and I'll fill it to where the engine oil is at the top here. And once I get it there, go ahead and screw this all the way back in. Start the engine up, let it run for a couple of minutes to let the oil circulate. Shut it off, let it settle, let it sit for 5-10 minutes, let the oil settle all the way back down. Then I'll recheck the oil. And usually 9 times out of 10, you'll have to add a little bit of oil to get the level back up to where it needs to be. And again, remember when you're checking the oil on the dipstick, you do so by just seating the oil dipstick into the beginning of the threads. You don't screw it all the way in. Before we put everything back together, I'll go ahead and show you how to change the transmission oil in this as well. Over here on the left side of the engine, the transmission oil fill hole bolt is right here. So you'll remove that. And then the drain bolt is right down underneath the engine here. It's kind of hard to see, but it is right there. I'll back up here so you can kind of see where it is in relation to the primary cover. So you drain it. Once it's drained, you'll put that back in. The torque on that one's 18 foot-pounds as well. And then you'll put 0.12 liters of 80 weight 90 hypoid gear oil back into the fill hole here. Place that bolt, tighten it down. This is the gear oil that I use in the transmission on this thing. So that's pretty much it for the oil change. Just need to put the plastic heel guards back on, put all the bolts on each side, and that's pretty much it. That's a wrap for this episode. Hopefully it was informative and you learned something. If so, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. In between episodes, you can follow me on social media at Hot Boys Racing with 2 T's on Instagram, and you can search for Hot Boys Racing on Facebook for our ATV drag racing page. I'll stick links to both of those in the video description. Definitely make sure you stay tuned for more content. Thanks for watching.